according to these online polls conducted by influencers, the best solution would be for all the aspirants in the coalition to stand behind Peter Obi and support him as the arrowhead that will challenge President Tinubu in 2027. And it's not just the influencers. Some respected journalists in traditional media platforms have been stridently making the same points, that if the coalition is to be taken seriously, it needs to win the trust of Nigerians by being demonstrably different from the outset. And according to these journos, Peter Obi is the kind of presidential material that any serious opposition party with an eye on the presidency needs, even though, according to one of them, Wole Olaoye, writing in the Leadership newspaper, a lot of work still has to be done to sell Obi's candidature in the northern states. But he suggests that, controversial as it may sound, the most viable opposition the coalition can muster is one with Peter Obi as presidential candidate. Once that is done, he says, the group can then embark on the task of selling him to the electorate across the nation. But will Atiku in particular and Amechi and El Rufai consider standing aside for Peter Obi? And why should they, when the mathematical formula used to identify, select, process and analyze the respondents in these online polls may well not necessarily be representative? Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by the international multimedia journalist and former BBC correspondent Donu Kogbara, who currently has a column in Vanguard newspaper, is a star of a YouTube channel called Donu's World, co-presents a podcast called Africa Here and Now, and writes for the Europe-based magazine Africa Report. And one of these online polls was conducted under the auspices of her media company. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. Good to see you again.
Thank you, Charles.
Tell us more about this poll you conducted and the results you got.
Okay, so it was a completely impulsive thing. I just thought, if we ran a poll on Twitter or X or Facebook or whatever, I wonder what people would say. Because you could live in an echo chamber full of yourself and people like you, and you all basically have the same views. So I thought, okay, I'll throw it open to the Twitter sphere and see what they say. I was quite taken aback by the results, because the week before I ran this poll, I took the trouble to do a special show, if you like, about Atiku and Amechi. I know both of them. I've met both of them. Amechi I used to be quite close to, and I know their strengths, okay? So I just thought, because, I'm obedient. Let me forget about Peter. Don't even really mention Peter. Let's look at what Amechi and Atiku can offer if elected. So I did this program talking about the good things about them, and then I posted the poll. And I was shocked by the results. As you said earlier, Atiku only got 7%, Amechi only got 6%, and 87% said they didn't want either of them. Now, look, we all know that polls can be inaccurate. But I didn't select the people who took this poll. It was totally random.
Yeah, because I was going to, I don't mean to interrupt you, I was going to jump in there. You kind of ruined it by saying you're obedient. So a lot of people would immediately roll their eyes and say, well, if you're an obedient...
I would say that, wouldn't I?
Yeah, it's very likely that you would be inclining in that direction. And let's be clear that it's not an absolutely scientific poll.
It's not scientific.
But it was an online poll you conducted amongst those who subscribe to you or your channel and so on.
Well,
in that regard, just tell us a bit more about the methodology that you used.
Well, to be honest with you, I don't know what methodology X or Facebook use with these polls. All I know is that it's a resource that's available to anybody. You could do one tomorrow asking people, do you think I'm handsome or ugly? Do you know what I mean?
Right.
You can throw any questions out there to the general
public. And anybody
public
in any part of the world can respond to it.
Exactly.
Right.
Where I would say there's probably some kind of bias is that the people who are paying attention to your videos and your posts, i.e. things like polls, are likely to be people who already have some kind of affinity with your thought processes and political preferences.
Yeah.
And we all know that even in the Western world, where they have much more scientific polls, like Mori and Ipsos in the UK,
They still get it wrong.
they still get it wrong sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I understand what you mean. I mean, it's very important because it's not really fair on Amechi and Atiku for us not to be absolutely clear on what the methodology is and what particularly the sample size, how representative they were. Because if it's something you throw open on Twitter, anybody anywhere in the world could respond to it. I mean, they could, people could just respond. I mean, although you're right that it tends to be narrowed to the people who tend to follow what you're doing, or people who kind of cock an eye to what you're doing. And those people are more likely to be obedient, aren't they?
Well, I'll also point out that trolls who hate you and support the other side are also likely to keep an eye
That
on
is
what you're
true.
doing. And there was nothing to stop 10 million trolls from participating in this poll and saying rubbish, rubbish, Atiku is fantastic, Amechi is fantastic. And I didn't mention Peter. I think, so, it's random. I think what polls do is they're a snapshot. They're a snapshot of a particular demographic at a particular point in time. They are not the end-all and be-all. If you run the same poll with the same group of people or on the same platform on another day, you might get different results. But it is very interesting that Rufai, your colleague from the Morning Arise show, had pretty much the same results.
Yes, I saw that. In fact, we had that on the screen just now. But you also mentioned something else about one of your programs where you did something on, I can't remember whether you said Amechi or Atiku or something, and the number of hits or something you got. I wasn't quite clear on that.
Okay, so I have a YouTube channel called Donu's World.
Yeah,
and
which I watch from time to time.
Well, I should hope so too.
Very good, actually,
Thank
I have
you.
to say.
Thank you
very
much.
interesting.
Thank you. Well, I watch prime time, so thank you. So
we'll start a mutual admiration club, shall we?
Well, what happens is that when you pick a certain topic that is massively appealing to the public, again, the random public, anybody can tune in and watch your show. YouTube is very democratic in that way. Some topics attract a lot of new subscribers and a lot of views. For example, when Prince Harry and Meghan visited Nigeria last year, I did a couple of shows on them, and there was the responses were off the wall, thousands and thousands. The same thing, to some extent, happened this month with my channel. After a program on Peter B, I got 611 new subscribers. But when I did a program about Amechi and Atiku the following week, I only got something like 170. So that's another indication, to some extent, of the popularity of the topic or individual that you are discussing.
Yeah, but it also depends, because to be fair, when Rotimi Amechi was on this program just a few weeks ago, sitting where you're sitting, I mean, he got more than 200,000 views within 48 hours after it was uploaded to YouTube. So the number of hits is not necessarily reflective of how popular someone is. It could also be how notorious or how infamous that person is. I mean, they tend to attract sort of, or how controversial they are.
That was certainly the case with Harry and Meghan, because a lot of the thousands and thousands who responded thoroughly disapprove of Meghan's decision to drag Harry out of the royal family, as I do. And so, you can also get people who don't like you responding. So I suppose it's possible that the 611 Peter Obi hits or subscribers could have been people who hate him.
Well, I don't know, to be honest.
But what I was going to say is that I am very, very sensitive to this issue of your audience is almost sort of like subconsciously self-selecting. And so I'm a southerner, I'm from the South. I make a lot of noise about what's happening in the Niger Delta or in Rivers State where I come from. And so, and my mother's from the Southeast. And, you know, I'm a southern person, and so I also have a lot of Yoruba friends from the southwest. I'm not saying I don't have friends from the north, but, you know, my demographic is quite heavily weighted towards the south. So I'm quite aware of the possibility that my audience is not northern enough. There's not enough of a balance or a mix. And I'm doing something about that. I'm actually arranging a poll for Kano, Maiduguri, and places like that. And I'm trying to find a way of making sure there's enough inclusion so that, you know, so that we reflect the views of people who are not from my side of the country.
Right. No, that's a good point. I mean, but there is obviously the issue of public trust, isn't there, which remains a big issue, because I've seen other sort of polls that looked at Atiku and Amechi and El Rufai and all that, and that was a big issue, the question of public trust, but which Obi seemed to have in abundance. And I'm wondering whether you found that in your own sort of experience.
I just find that Peter Obi is way and above the most popular politician in Nigeria today, and has been for the past 3 years. I'm talking about from the year preceding the election when he left the PDP to become a candidate in his own right. I also would like to remind everybody that Peter ran alongside Atiku in 2019, and they didn't do that well. So there's something about Peter on his own that seems to work.
Right.
Now, when I go to other places, like I went to Sierra Leone recently, lots and lots of people said to me, do you know Peter Obi? Once they found out I was Nigerian. Sierra Leoneans. When I am in London, Uber drivers, even Yoruba ones, who you would think would be Ashiwaju, often say, Madam, what do you do? And I tell them, and they say, do I know Peter Obi? That Peter Obi is their man. So I just think he's very, very popular. Do you know what I think? This is a very radical thought, I suppose. I think the only other person who could possibly have gained this kind of traction if he'd had the opportunity to run would have been Oshibajo, the former vice president. I think if the APC process had thrown Oshibajo up, I think he could have given Peter a run for his money in terms of public perception and popularity.
But I mean, are you at all, because you talked about the fact that Peter Obi ran with Atiku in 2019 and they didn't get anywhere, but then when he ran on his own, he kind of chalked up quite a lot of votes. I mean, are you at all bothered in that regard by the political bedfellows that Peter Obi is now wallowing with or forced to join up with in this coalition?
To be honest with you, I was very concerned and still am concerned to some extent, and I know a lot of Obedients are really, really, really unhappy about this issue about bedfellows. But the thing is, can Peter win on his own? Can this country be delivered from APC rule by Peter Obi as a single entity, a solo entity? I don't know, but it's always the safety in numbers, okay? And I think it's almost impossible to be a member of any club or alliance in which you like everybody who's involved. It was the same thing in 2013, 2014, when was it ACN and CPC were coming together to form the APC. Look, most people are only interested in Buhari because Buhari had this image of being a man with a ramrod straight spine who didn't take nonsense, was very, very allergic to corruption. And I, for one, I fell for it. You know, I wasn't interested in the rest of them. And most people I know who supported Buhari had the same thing. It was like, oh, well, all right, if we have to put up with Tinubu as well and this person and that person, fine. But the real person we want is Buhari. I think at that time they said by himself he could command 12 million votes from Talakawas, which is poor people in the north, the masses. And I think Peter's a bit like that. You know, by himself he can command millions of votes. And there are some good people in the ADC alliance, just like there were in the APC. I mean, it wasn't only Buhari who commanded my respect in 2013, 2014. And it isn't only Peter who commands my respect now. But there's definitely going to be a lot of people dotted around whom you really rather not see standing next to him.
Well, I mean, the key issue here is about the impact, if he becomes preeminent, that it might have on that coalition alliance that you're talking about. I mean, the coalition alliance, virtually the same word, but if the coalition starts its journey by being divided and polarized in competition with each other over this, who's going to get the presidential ticket, then the whole point of collaboration would have been dashed, wouldn't it? I mean, and you might as well, if you like, lay the coalition to rest.
Okay, so they've got 2 years to sort this out, okay? And I imagine they'll sort it out this year. I think that Atiku, for whom I do have some respect, genuinely, he's not perfect, but I think he's got some good points, some strengths in his character. I think Atiku should become the daddy of this thing. He should become a statesman who stands behind Peter and whoever his running mate will be, which I hope is Dati. Well, I mean, I don't know, it could be somebody else. I took a shine to Dati because he's so outspoken. But that doesn't mean I agree with everything he says. But I quite like people who say what they're thinking, in straight shooters. Anyway, I think Atiku should be the father in this situation. He shouldn't compete with them anymore. If you like, they always beneath him. He's a former vice president. He's nearly 80. Yeah? And I think if Atiku does that and rallies the northern vote, I think they could do rather well.
But some would make the argument that when you compare Atiku in terms of age with Tinubu, and Tinubu is obviously planning to run again, at least that's what we think at this point, in 2027, then there's absolutely no reason why Atiku shouldn't run. I mean, you yourself said on one of your programs that Tinubu is not a spring chicken when it comes to age, and that it won't be the end of the world if his time in office ends in 2027, having served one term. But clearly he's planning to run. Nobody's sitting down. I mean, a lot of people are focusing on Atiku in terms of age, but nobody's really talking that much about Tinubu himself as well. And he clearly is already incumbent, and he's, fully planning to run in 2027.
Well, he shouldn't. There are lots of things we all do that we shouldn't do. We're human. He's enjoying the power. If he can still stand on his 2 legs and, mount a pulpit or a rostrum, he can go ahead, but he's too old, in my opinion. I think we need, slightly younger people. And so I'm not discriminating against Atiku. I think both Atiku and Tinubu should stand aside. I do. And not just because of age, where Tinubu is concerned. I want to lodge a serious complaint against Tinubu. I think he's really bad for this country. I used to have some regard for him, but after what he's done in Rivers State with the state of emergency...
That's your state.
My state. I'm just appalled by his behavior. And then there are so many other things. Like, you're coming in from the airport, and every single lamppost has a poster of Tinubu on it. The same thing along many of the highways in town. What kind of cult of personality nonsense is this? You're supposed to be using those billboards as a means to celebrate the country and what it has to offer. They should be saying things like, welcome to Abuja, come to the cultural center, blah, blah, blah. It's all him, him, him. So I don't like this cult of personality. I think it's unhealthy. I think it's tyrannical. And I would really, really like to see him move on. And do you know what? Nobody's all bad. They say that things like some of his, even the mighty Financial Times newspaper of the United Kingdom recently wrote an article in which it praised Tinubu for certain economic moves. I mean, I didn't agree with the article, but hey, I'm not an economics expert. And so there are some things
but
that...
I mean, isn't it the same sort of, perhaps in a slightly different way, but similar as well, the same kind of cult of personality that you've got around Peter Obi, for example. I mean, Peter Obi has a movement that has adopted his name as their their name tag, they're called obedience. I mean, they follow Peter Obi like through thick and thin. I mean, if you listen to them on the internet, read their stuff on the internet, it's like, we don't care what he does, we don't care where he goes, we're going to follow him. So isn't that the same kind of cult of personality?
Well, anybody who's fortunate enough to have a name that lends itself well to that kind of sloganizing or sloganeering is lucky. After all, you have articulated. You have in Rivers State our deadbeat governor who has just surrendered completely to the forces of God knows what. His name is Kogbara. His group were called Simplified. So, the obedient thing is the same thing. It's a play on words. But I think I can even just see him on the screen, and I'm just so irritated. But we'll talk about Sim another day. The thing, I don't approve of unconditional worship of anybody.
Right.
I do not approve of hero worship. If Peter Obi does something really obnoxious tomorrow, I will be the first one to say so. So I know that there are people who, even if he was caught misbehaving in the worst possible way, they will still not give way and admit that he could be wrong. But I do not believe to that. I do not belong to that school of thought.
Right. But you just to be clear, you don't mind him being in the coalition, or you wouldn't. I mean, you would have preferred it if he stood on his own, as he did in 2023.
Yes, exactly. That's it. I would have preferred him to stand on his own, but I don't. I can live with the coalition.
Right.
And I think don't listen. What I keep on telling people: do not listen to this view that Asiwaju Jagaban is so omnipotent, omniscient that nobody else stands a chance of beating him in 2027. It's not a done deal. If the coalition gets its act together, curbs its more unsavory members, and presents a united front, there's no reason why Tinubu and APC cannot be replaced in 2027.
Right, but what about the bounce? The bounce that Atiku got from coming second in the 2023 election, and Amechi got from coming second in the 2023 APC primaries. I mean, should they just forget about all that?
No.
Because it suggests that they have considerable popularity amongst the Nigerian people.
First of all, I don't trust the results of the 2023 election. I have no idea who really won it. I really don't. There was so much mago. I don't know who won the 2023 election in certain states and federally. So I can't say for sure that Atiku came second. It could be that Peter came first and they shoved him to third to bring him down a peg or two and demoralize his supporters. Do you know what I mean? Maybe Tinubu won, maybe he didn't win. But I'm not sure of that because of INEC's disgraceful performance. Then, on the issue of Amechi coming second in the PDP primary, in the APC primaries, I was rather proud of him because people were caving in one after the other, giving their votes to Asiwaju and stepping back for Asiwaju. I was very proud of Amechi for standing his ground and insisting on going ahead, even though it was obvious he wasn't going to go anywhere in that bribe-charged environment.
Yeah, well, one of the things that was mentioned as a cautionary note to the coalition is that if they choose Peter Obi as their candidate, they have to figure out how to sell him to the north. I think it was Wale Olaoye wrote a brilliant article in the Leadership newspaper. How careful should they be not to poke that bear?
This thing about the north. Well, from what I can see, Tinubu has already upset a lot of northerners. So I would say that many of them, at least the ones in my personal circle, not all of them, but some, have no intention of supporting him again. I don't know what he promised them that they're so bitter against him, And I'm going to tell you that even amongst obedience, there is a branch of the obedience movement that thinks the only good thing Tinubu has ever done is putting the north in its place. Now, I don't have a view on that. But all I can say is that I'm not sure it's going to be that difficult to topple Tinubu in the north this time round. That's if he even won the north in the first place. How do you know that Atiku didn't win the north? How do you know that Peter didn't do much better in the north than we think? We're only relying on the numbers that INEC gave
Well,
us.
to be honest, that's all we can rely on.
Yes.
I mean, what would your advice be to the leadership of the ADC coalition going forward? We've got about a minute and a half left in this very interesting conversation.
One of the reasons why people voted for Buhari, even though they didn't like a lot of the people around him, was they believed he was a disciplined man who, if he got into office, would control all the bad eggs in his party. That is what I'm hoping with Peter Obi, is that if he makes it, some of these people who need to be disciplined or need to be pushed aside politely, not necessarily insulted or disrespected, and maybe they could even be rewarded, but I would say that you need to put the most popular person front and center. You need to assure the public that those who have a less than fantastic reputation are not going to be the image of the party. They're not going to have that much power. And I suppose it's such a difficult balancing act, because you can't go around saying, well, this guy is my political ally, but I know he's a rogue, so if I win the presidency, I'm going to marginalize him, because obviously he's going to get pissed off and he's not going to support you. So it's difficult. I don't envy Peter. I don't envy Atiku. I don't envy Amici. They have to find some kind of balance that works, But I just think Nigerians, they have shown so little tendency to stand up and be countered when the wrong thing is done. I call them the sheeple, the Nigerian sheeple. Stop behaving like sheep. Look at everything that's going on, judge, and protest when there's a reason to protest.
On that note, I want to thank you very much indeed. Donu Kogbara is the international multimedia journalist, former BBC correspondent, currently a columnist with Vanguard newspaper, star of a YouTube channel called Donu's World, co-presenter of a podcast called Africa Here and Now, and writer for the Europe-based magazine Africa Report. Thank you very much indeed. Good to see you.